This next contribution from Dr. Monica Ward, Dean of Teaching and Learning, and Dr. Martina Crehan, Dean, Head of Teaching Enhancement Unit at Dublin City University, is again in the form of a lightning talk titled Interactive Oral Assessment. Thank you very much.
Okay, is this my countdown clock?
Your clock will give you 10 minutes there in a moment.
Okay, grand. So I hope you like what we're practicing, what our preaching here. Active student engagement and all the stuff to make sure that you're all awake. So as I'm talking, if you're kind of the sugar rush from 2 o'clock has kind of pared back, you can grab one of the cookies on the table. Okay, so I'm going to get you to. So how many people here have heard of interactive oral assessment? Okay, so those of you who haven't put your hand up, you weren't paying enough attention at the Downey's presentation this morning where he did mention it. And how many of you have taken part in interactive oral assessments? A few of you, great, okay. So an interactive oral assessment, so this is the definition we work with, is a genuine, unscripted, synchronous conversation between an assessor and a student, or a group of students, around an authentic workplace or professional scenario, okay, which can be formed face-to-face or online. Okay, so I'm just going to unpick some of those words. So it's an unscripted conversation. So you don't know in advance. Obviously, you know roughly the themes you're going to touch, but you don't know there's no questions in advance. They're prompts that you use to kind of continue a conversation. It's based on an authentic workplace scenario, so it's not very hypothetical. So it's allowing the students to see them as their future professional selves. Group assessment student. Okay, so we'll come on to that in a minute, okay? So the only thing I want you to remember, that is not a viva, it's a conversation. So why would we use an interactive oral assessment? Well, we in DCU, Dublin City University, we started using them first for the authentic assessment, the academic integrity aspect of doing the assessment. So we started them in September 2020, and it was a really good way of ensuring that the student knew what you hoped they would learn. You're talking to the student, and you can see kind of their learnings. It's a really authentic form of assessment because I don't know where you work, well, maybe some of you, but it's unlikely a scenario that you go to a workplace and somebody would sit you in a room with no access to any technology and get you to write something without accessing the internet or anything like that. So in a workplace scenario, you're going to be talking to people. They're going to ask you about your knowledge, look for your input and ideas. So it's much more authentic. It's also really good in terms of skills development. So sometimes we hear that the students are really good technically, they know their stuff, but they're not very good at communicating it. And interactive oral is a great way of working on those transversal skills because they have to listen to what you're saying, they have to come up with a somewhat intelligent answer and kind of have, kind of a meaningful professional conversation. I will point you to 2 elements of the literature that are kind of important. Well, the first one is important because it was written by the experts, and the next one is slightly less important, I have to say, because it was co-written by myself and my colleagues in DCU, and we provide scenarios from different disciplines of how we've used interactive oral assessments and how it can be really rigorous. So we have used it on 21 courses. We have had 33 cohorts since we started using it in semester 1 of 2020. Over 3,000 students have used it, and we've used it across all our disciplines, all our faculties. And Martina will speak a bit about the process, and it sounds very woo-woo and kumbaya-ish, but it's kind of, there is a kind of a process that you do follow. And for me personally, I love the creative element of this, so thinking of the scenario and how will that work. And I love when people say, oh, that would work well, that has worked really well, I love your examples, but it wouldn't work in my discipline, because my discipline's special. But I haven't found one yet where it doesn't work. So as part of the QQI funding, so everybody has thanked QQI so far, so I will thank you, QQI, for your funding for this project. So if we look at voices from the field, so what we interviewed, so part of what we did as part of this project, we interviewed staff who had used the interactive oral assessment process, what they thought, get their feedback. We also did a roadshow around the country. You know, if only I had music, I could sing you a few of the songs, but we had our expert from Australia, and we visited several institutions to kind of, you know, talk to people about interactive oral and kind of spread the good news. So one of the things that the feedback we got was that it's really rigorous, you know, in terms of, you know, what you're doing. So it's not very woolly, as Martina will show in a minute. It's really important to follow the process because we've worked hard at honing the process to make sure that it actually works for people. I can't read the middle one there. What does it say? Oh, yes, so the value of the conversational approach. So I'm really keen on this. So if you've ever done a viva voce and people come in and they say to you, you know, I think people perform worse when they're under stress and they can't think. But if you know I'm having a conversation and if you're going down a rabbit hole, I'll bring you back, you're going to get the best out of students. It's really good in terms of the real life experience, and I'm happy to talk to people afterwards about example because I see the clock going like this. I have here that the students love it, but the academics also like it as well. So a phrase that I've coined myself, but you're quite free to take if you like, is it's the least worst form of assessment, and you can actually have good chats with your students. Over to you, Martina.
Thank you very much, Monica. Just unveil all of those for the sake of time. Yes, and there's no woo-woo or kumbaya, I promise, in this. So part of the work that the QQI project allowed us as well to undertake was to establish this central aspect of IO support and to develop a process for the creation of an interactive oral. So this is something that we recommend to staff that should occur over that time period. We know that nothing is perfect from a time perspective in the world of academia, so certainly that time period may be a little bit more condensed depending on the particular context and the situation. But what's really important is that you follow the steps from the design perspective. So starting with that rationale, so thinking very clearly and carefully about where an IO assessment will fit in the context of your module. Being very clear about the difference between an interactive oral assessment and a more traditional viva type assessment, making sure that it aligns with the learning outcomes, all of the usual things that we have to do in terms of planning or designing an assessment. Quite a lot of work then needs to go into designing and firming up scenarios. So an interactive oral assessment is always based around a scenario, which is the basis for the conversation with the student or the group of students. So again, thinking about what that scenario is, linking it to learning outcomes, thinking about it in the context of your module as a whole. What's really key to an assessment in this context is the rubric that's designed. And as you know, any of you who've spent a lot of time working on rubrics, they take a lot of time and a lot of care. And because an interactive oral assessment is unpredictable to some extent, it doesn't have these set questions that you start out with in a normal or more traditional oral, the rubric is the core of consistency, validity, reliability, all of the things that we need to think about in terms of assessment. We also are very focused in interactive oral assessment on scaffolding and framing this for students and giving them an opportunity before they actually embark on the real assessment to get a sense of what it is, what it's going to feel like, how it's different from other forms of oral assessment that they might have encountered. So within each module where an interactive oral assessment is being used, staff create and record an example of a scenario, which they then play for the students, give the students the rubric, and the students assess that recorded example with the rubric. It's also a great opportunity, and we've seen really nice examples of this, where staff can actually then work with the students to co-construct, to maybe rework parts of that rubric, to get some insights from students as to how it might work a little bit better. So using that rubric and using that video in class in preparation for the IO. And then we also recommend that staff have a little bit of a practice session with colleagues, particularly if they're new to this form of assessment. It can be really, really difficult to stop yourself from the what, who, why, how types of questions that we normally use in an oral assessment. So developing and applying that conversational perspective takes a bit of practice, and we really recommend that colleagues will work together in terms of practicing that. In the very few seconds that I've left, so a very vital part of the process is also the jigsaw of support which we provide for those implementing interactive oral assessment. So in DCU, we have a weekly community of practice for those who are implementing or planning to implement an interactive oral assessment. We meet weekly. The weeks are usually themed by the phases that you saw in that previous slide, but people can join at any time to kind of share challenges, opportunities, sticky points that they're experiencing in the design. It's facilitated by the Teaching Enhancement Unit, but really all of the participants are empowered to act as critical friends to each other. We find that those participants then go out and become ambassadors for interactive oral assessments, and we constantly get the question, oh, can I bring along my friend who I've told about interactive oral assessments who want to become involved and think about it. That community of practice is now widening out. So over the last few months, we've been sharing a lot of our practice with other HEIs via workshops and webinars. So over the last couple of months, we've done a piece of work with TCD and with RCSI. But we know that there are really good examples of practice in many other institutions. So in UL, University of Galway, and our colleagues in CCT. So we are about to embark on establishing a collaborative network of academic developers who again can meet and talk about the joys and the challenges of supporting this process. So if you're an academic developer in the room using IOs, expect to get an email from me in the very near future. Just two final slides then. So again, one of the very important outputs from the QQI project has been the establishment of our interactive oral assessment website. And again, that provides lots of resources, lots of examples, lots of videos, information on rubrics, our IO user guide, which hopefully will be useful to anybody who is planning to implement interactive oral assessment. And finally, Monica and I are here this afternoon really representing the work of a team of people who have brought this project to fruition. So I especially have to mention a few people. So Dr. Fiona O'Riordan, formerly of DCU, now in CCT, who was really the instigator of this in DCU with Monica. Jagadish Tangaraj, who's our research assistant and who was responsible for a lot of the work on the website. My colleague Lily, who's an academic development officer in the TU with myself and who is really central to the support of that community of practice. Of course, our DCU interactive oral community of practice, and Danielle Logan-Fleming, formerly of Griffith University in Australia. I know she's since moved to a new institution, but who was really instrumental in terms of guiding us in the development of an interactive oral assessment process. So, thank you very much.
Now, thanks very much to Monica and Martina.